Hey friends, what up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Yud Zayin, Daf 17 of Masechta Hagiga. Friends, wait, is today Yud Zayin? Wait, no, whoa, one second. I think yesterday we did Yud Zayin. We could do it again. The Meister is a pretty small Daf. But friends, you know how it goes with Daf Yomi. If we do one Daf twice, well, basically, if we do Yud Zayin again today, well, then we're going to have to do 2 tomorrow, because we're going to have to make up Yud Ches. You get what I'm saying? So let's just stick with the program over here. Friends, we're going to learn Daf Yud Ches of Masechta Hagiga. The first part of the Daf continues with what we were discussing yesterday. What were we discussing yesterday? Wait, seriously. What were we discussing yesterday? Tashlumin. How do we know that there's Tashlumin for Shavuos? And then that gets into the question about how do we know that Chol hamoed is also to do Melacha on Chol hamoed? And that's kind of the first Amud. And then, friends, everybody's favorite topic, well, that's probably more subjective. Maybe it's some people's favorite topic, tumah and tahara. Probably not too many people though. Friends, we're moving into tumah and tahara zone. I think that's basically going to take us to the end of the Masechta, which is also coming up, about 10 daf. Friends, let's jump in. We're on Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph, second line on the page. For Rish Lakish Omar, it says Rish Lakish, how do we know that there's Tashlumin for Shavuos? That if you don't bring the Korbanis, the Korban Hagiga, I assume it's also the Olas Re'iyah, on Shavuos, that you can bring, make it up over the course of the next week. So Rish Lakish Omar v'chag kotzir, that the pasuk says. And what does the pasuk say? Right, so it's talking about Shavuos, and it says Chag HaKotzir. Ezehu Chag Shata Chogeg v'Kotzir. It says Chag HaKotzir, right? The Chag and the harvest. So when do you have this sort of Chagiga and also harvesting? Have Omer Ze'atzeres. That's talking about Shavuos. Amos. Okay, now when are you bringing the Chagiga and harvesting at the same time? In the context of Shavuos, if you're talking about, on Yom Tiv, mapetom on Yom Tiv, Katsir Yom Tiv Mishari, are you allowed to harvest on Yom Tiv? Obviously not. Yom Tiv, you just gotta chill out. I mean, every day you gotta chill out. I'm not so chilled today. I had a surprise, well, not a complete surprise, but the accountant's called. Whew, I don't like when the accountant's called, but they always end up calling eventually. Death and taxes, friends, death and taxes. Okay. Mishari. So Akoponim. So nu. How do we get there? Because you're supposed to be chilled out every day. I wasn't so chilled out today. Akoponim. Friends, what are we talking about? So you're not allowed to harvest on Shavuos. So ella lav tashlumin. So therefore, I must be talking about tashlumin. Kilu. When you bring the Korban Chagiga and also harvesting, so it's not on Shavuos, so it's talking about the week following Shavuos that you can bring the Korban Chagiga if you have not yet offered it, and you can also harvest on those days. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, says Rabbi Yochanan to Rish Lakish Elamiata, but let me ask you a question. Chag ha'asif. Let me ask you a question. It says Chag ha'asif, right? The festival of gathering. Ezu Chag sheish bo asifa. What is the festival that also has gathering? Haviyomer ze Chag HaSukkos. So Mela, that's talking about Sukkos. Amos. Now, when are you gathering on Sukkos? And if we're going to say that you're gathering on Yom Tiv, so you're not allowed to gather on Yom Tiv. Okay, fine. So if we're not talking about Yom Tiv, so maybe on Chol hamoed. Chul Shamoed Mishari. But are you allowed to gather on Chol hamoed either? You're not allowed to work the fields. And therefore, when are you going to do the Tashlumin? Kilu, if we're saying that by Shavuos, how do we know that you can do Tashlumin the week following Shavuos? Well, because it says Chag HaKotzir, the festival of harvesting, and maybe you're not going to be harvesting on the Yom Tov, so it must be that you're harvesting after Shavuos, and it must be that the week following you're allowed to bring the Tashlumin of the Korban Chagiga if you didn't bring it on Shavuos itself. But that doesn't really hold up in the context of the same logic cannot be applied to Sukkos, and if it you can't only apply it in one place and not the other, right? If it's good logic, if it's sound logic, it's sound logic. Now, if we try to apply the same logic to Sukkot, it doesn't work, because by Sukkot, it says Chag HaOsif, right? The festival of gathering. So so the logic by Shavuos was that, well, you have to be able to bring the Korban Hagiga on a day that you are gathering. Well, and therefore there's Tashlumin even following Shavuos. But that wouldn't hold up for Sukkot, because by Sukkot, you bring the Korban Hagiga on the first day of Sukkot. If you didn't bring it the first day of Sukkot, you could bring it the rest of the festival of Sukkot, but after Sukkot, you missed your chance. Now, if we're saying that Chag HaOsif, that you bring the Korban Hagiga on the same day on a day that you're able to gather, right, using the same logic that we use by Shavuos, well, you're not going to be gathering on Yom Tov, but you're also not going to be gathering on Chol HaMoed, which is when you're allowed to do the Tashlumin. So, and after Sukkot, it's already too late. So, that svara of being able to bring the Korban Hagiga on a day that, by Shavuos, on a day that you're harvesting, that doesn't apply, that doesn't copy over well to Sukkot, because you're actually never bringing the Korban Hagiga on Sukkot on a day that you're able to gather. So rather, how do you understand Chag HaOsif? Chag HaBab is Manasifa. It means a festival that comes during the time of year that you're gathering. Ochonami. Chag HaBab is Man Ketzira. That Chag HaOsif, Chag HaKotzir just means a festival that comes during the time of year that you are harvesting, but it's not necessarily, right? Rabbi Yochanan again argues against Rish Lakish that is not necessarily a proof that that there's tashlumin, for the week following Shavuos. Let's go weiter. So we just had a machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish regarding how we learn out that there's tashlumin for Shavuos in the week following Shavuos. Now, the thing is, Rabbi Yochanan asked the kasha and Rish Lakish. He says, "Look, Rish Lakish, your logic doesn't add up, because while it sounds very nice by Shavuos, it doesn't hold up by Sukkot. The same logic wouldn't hold up by Sukkot, because on Sukkot you're not allowed to do melacha the whole of Chol HaMoed, and Rish Lakish didn't necessarily have a problem with that, right? Meaning, right? It seemed like both Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish agreed that, yeah, that's a good point. You're not allowed to do any melacha on Chol HaMoed. Now, if that's the case, it sounds like everyone agrees, right? So it says the Gemara. I just lost the place. So, right, so Michal, that implies that Tarayu Svirlu to Chul HaMoed also basiyas melacha. So it sounds like both Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish at least agree that you're not allowed to do malacha on Chol HaMoed. How do we know that you're not allowed to do malacha on Chol HaMoed? The Tanur Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, is Chag HaMatzis Tishmor Shivas Yomim, that you should guard Pesach for 7 days. So if you're guarding Pesach for 7 days, so Memele, we're learning that for all 7 days, you're not allowed to do milach, you're not allowed to do work. Tiv Rabbi Yoshia, that's Rabbi Yoshia's opinion. Now, Rabbi Yonasan Omer says, Rabbi Yonasan, Eino tzarich, you don't need that pasuk. Kal v'chomer, because rather, it's logical. Umarishin v'shvi'i, she'ein kedusha lefnein, v'la'acharein, osur basiyas melacha. Well, if you look at the first day of Pesach and the last day of Pesach, that you're not allowed to do melacha on them, right? Meaning, if you look at the first day of Pesach, so you're allowed to do malacha the day before. If you look at the last day of Pesach, you're allowed to do malacha the day after. And even though, on one of the surrounding days, you're allowed to do the malacha, nonetheless, on it itself, you're not allowed to do malacha. Let's go weiter for a second. When it comes to Chol HaMoed, which is sandwiched by days of Yom Tif, right, the middle 5 days of Pesach is sandwiched on one side by the first day of Pesach, which is Yom Tiv, and on the other side by the last day of Pesach, which is Yom Tiv. So it's surrounded on both sides by a Yom Tiv. So memele, you should be unable to do malacha on Chol HaMoed. Kilu, if the first day and the last day, which aren't completely surrounded by holy days, right? The first day, the Erev Yom Tov is a weekday, you're allowed to do malacha. It's not a Yom Tov, right? The day after Yom Tov also, you're allowed to do malacha. and still on Yom Tov itself you're not allowed to do malacha. Chol hamoed, which is sandwiched by 2 days of Yom Tov, so certainly you should not be allowed to do malacha. And for the Gemara, sheishes yimei breishis yochichu. But one second, if we look actually at the Sunday through Friday, sheish kedusha lefneinu lachrein, that right every Sunday the day before is Shabbos, and every Friday the day afterwards is Shabbos. Right, so the 6 days of the week are surrounded on both sides by Shabbos. Umutar basiyas malacha, and yet at memela you're allowed to do malacha during the week. So we see that the fact that Chol hamoed is sandwiched by days of Yom Tov is not a very compelling argument for them to be asur b'asiyas malacha. So, but one second, maybe that's not a good proof to bring from Sunday through Friday, because she'ein boen korban musaf. We don't, right, on just a regular Sunday through Friday, there's no korban musaf. That's apples and oranges. You can't compare Sunday through Friday to Chol hamoed. Chol hamoed has a korban musaf, and that's what makes it special. It has a korban musaf, and therefore it's going to be asur b'asiyas malacha. In fact, the Gemara Rosh Chodesh yochiach sheyesh bo korban musaf u'mutar b'asiyas malacha. But what about Rosh Chodesh? Rosh Chodesh, you bring korbanos in Rosh Chodesh, and yet you're allowed to do malacha. So the fact that on Chol hamoed you bring korbanos, that isn't necessarily a compelling argument to say that it should be asur b'asiyas malacha, because in Rosh Chodesh you bring korbanos and you're allowed to do malacha. So Mala Rosh Chodesh she'ein kori mikra kodesh. Yeah, but Rosh Chodesh is not called a holy day. Right? You're going to say that Chol hamoed is called a holy day. It's a holy day, so maybe you can't do malacha. So Havakori Mikra Kodesh Dinu Sha'asu B'asiyas Malacha, and therefore says the Gemara, if it's called after all Mikra Kodesh, if it's called a holy day, so then Memele, it should be also B'asiyas Malacha. Tanya Yidach, we have another brayso that says Kom lechas avoda lo saisu. It says by Sukkot that you shouldn't do any melacha. Limit al chulu shamoid she'asu b'asiyas melacha. It teaches that Chol hamoed Sukkot is also b'asiyas melacha. To Rabbi Yossi Aglili, that's Rabbi Yossi Aglili's opinion. Okay, right? Because what does the pasuk say? The pasuk says b'yom harishon mikra kodesh kom lechas avoda lo saisu shivas yom takivu yishal Hashem. Right? So it juxtaposes, right, that kom lecha lo saisu to the 7 days. That for all 7 days of during Chol hamoed Sukkot, you shouldn't be doing any melacha. Rabbi Akiva Omer says, Rabbi Akiva, you don't need that pasuk. The pasuk says, Eila meyadei Hashem v'gomer. That the pasuk says also in the context of Sukkot, it says, right, these are the festivals of God, Mikrai Kodesh, that they are days of holiness. What is it talking about? In Barishan Arei Kvar Ne'amar, if it were talking about the first day of Sukkot, well, it already says Shabboson. It says that it's holy. It's Shabbos. It's a day that you don't do melacha. Bashmini Arei Kvar Ne'amar Shabboson, and also on the 8th day of Sukkot it says Shabboson. So rather, when the pasuk says Mikrai Kodesh, the holy days, it must be talking about Memele Chol hamoed Lamed Choshasu B'asiyas Melacha, to teach that you're not allowed to do melacha on Chol hamoed. Tanidach, we have another brayso, Sheishes Yom Tocha Matzis. For 6 days you should eat matzahs. Uvayom Hashvi Atzeres L'Hashem, and then day 7 is Yom Tov. Mashvi Otzer Av Sheishes Yomim Atzurin. Just like day 7, you don't do melacha. So Memele, also on the first 6 days you don't do melacha. Imashvi Otzer B'chol Melacha Av Sheishes Yom Atzurin B'chol Melacha. So now, affect the Gemara. Well, if right on day 7 of Pesach, of course, you're not allowed to do any melacha. It's a Yom Tov. So then I would say that the 6 days preceding as well, right, i.e. Chol hamoed, right, or including Chol hamoed, should be also around all types of melachos. We, of course, learn Masechta Moed Katan, it doesn't apply to all melachos, right? Davar Aved is permitted. So Tamalomer v'Yom Hashvi Atzeres, that it says that on day 7 you stop. Hashvi Otzu B'chol Melacha, that day 7 you're not allowed to do any melacha. Ve'en Shisha Yomim Atzurim B'chol Melacha. But the other 6 days, or really the 5 days of Chol hamoed, are not asur in all melachos. Lo halamusarin akasuv el lachachamim. Rather, it was given over, right, the interpretation of which days and which melachos are allowed and not allowed was given over, empowered to the Chachamim, lo malach, to say to you, Eze yom asur, ve'eze yom mutter, which days are you not allowed to do malacha, which days are you allowed to do malacha, Ezo malacha asur, ve'ezo malacha muteres, which malacha is forbidden and which is permitted. I kind of love that a little bit, right? That the Eibishter, he empowers the people, he empowers the Yidden to interpret what certain things mean. I love it. I mean, it's like kind of like, again, if I could pull in sort of some agile product development techniques, so kind of something like I don't remember like all the agile principles, or I think maybe they call them tenets or something, but part of it is like empowering the developers, right? And right, meaning, part of it is, you break it up, everything into like, value that you can constantly be adding, but sort of you give space to developers to evaluate the complexity and to solve the problem in the best possible way. So anyways, lahavdil elef alfei avdalis, so the Eibishter, he gives space to the rabbis to define certain things, such as what are the kinds of malachos that are allowed and not allowed on Chol HaMoed. The Eibishter doesn't say that. The rabbis, they relied upon them to say, well, davar ovid is mutter, davar, if it's not a davar ovid, then it's also fine. Mutar behespid v'tainis shalakayim es divrei omrin atzeres achar Shabbos. So the Mishnah had said that in the event that Shavuos falls out on Shabbos, so you do not offer the Olas Riyah and Sham Chagiga on Shabbos, rather you offer it the next day. However, the Mishnah had said that on the next day, that on Sunday, the Kohen Gadol would not wear sort of particularly Yom Tov Dike looking clothing, and they would eulogize, they would be able to fast, in order to make it clear that Sunday is not Yom Tov, it's just Tashlumin, because the Tzedukim would say that Shavuos always falls out on a Sunday, as it says, Mimachros HaShabbos. So now says the Gemara, Ve'otanya, we learn about some Maise. There was a story of Maise Al-Aqsa Belud. Al-Aqsa died in Lud. V'nichnasu kol Yisrael l'softo, and all of the Yidden came to eulogize him. V'lo inicham Reb Tarfon, and Reb Tarfon did not allow them. B'nei Yom Tov shel Atzeres, because it was Shavuos. Now Yom Tov Sakadaitich, they really think that everybody who's coming in to eulogize on Yom Tov, he'd be Yom Tov Mika Asu. If it was in fact Yom Tov, would they actually be coming? Rather no, it was the day that they were slaughtering the korbanos of Yom Tov. Kilu Yom Tov was on so meaning it was the day of Tashlumin. Kilu was the day after Yom Tov. So let's say Yom Tov. Okay, so there was Yom Tov and there was the day after Yom Tov, and you say you're not allowed to eulogize. So on the one hand, our Mishnah says that you would be allowed to eulogize on the day after Yom Tov. Reb Tarfon seems to be saying that you would not be allowed to eulogize the day after Yom Tov. Lo kashis, no problem. Kan Yom Tov shchalios achar Shabbos. Kan Yom Tov shchalios b'Shabbos. So it depends. If Shavuos falls out on Shabbos, which means that the Tashlumin is going to be on Sunday, so then you would eulogize on that day to make a point that it's not Yom Tov. However, if Shavuos falls out on a Tuesday, so then the day after Yom Tov you would be allowed to do Tashlumin if you didn't offer the korbanos on Shavuos itself. So you could offer the korbanos the next day, and you would not eulogize on that day. So if Kilu Yom Tov, if Shavuos is on a Shabbos, then the day afterwards you would eulogize. If Shavuos was not on a Shabbos, then the day after you would not eulogize. Alright, that sounds very nice to me. Alright friends, who's ready? Who's ready for tumah and tahara? Everybody, I want to hear everybody say, I'm ready, Srili. Alright, let's go weiter. So says the Mishnah on Daf Yur Ches Amud Beis, top of the page. Notlin li yodayim lechulin u'lemaiser l'truma. You wash your hands for chulin, meiser, and truma. Woo! Okie dokie. So, okay, of course we know already from Masechta Brachos, 1,000,000 years ago, that your hands, stam yadayim shniyosei, that your hands are considered to be sheni l'tumah, second degree of tumah, which is mitame, which is posel truma, and mitame kodshim, right? That truma sort of can become a shlishi l'tum. Holy shnikes, friends, how much should we go into this? Oy vavoy, are we doing a whole rundown over here? Alright. Anyways, of course, avi avosa tumah is the highest level of tumah. That's like a corpse. And then if a fellow touches a corpse, then he becomes an ava tumah. Other ava tumahs, zav, zava, nida, mitzora, those are ava tumahs. Next, now an ava tumah could be mitami odom v'kelim, people and vessels. And then if an ava tumah, like a mitzora, touches a fellow, so that fellow becomes a rishon l'tumah. Now, a rishon l'tumah can only be mitame ochlin umashkin, right? Foods and liquids. Okay. Now, if you touch, so if you have a fellow who's a rishon l'tumah and he touches epis pizza, so the pizza becomes a sheni l'tumah. Now, a sheni l'tumah can, if it touches truma, so it's it's posel es truma. It makes the truma puzzle. It's called puzzle because once the truma becomes puzzle, it can't be mitame any other truma, right? Really, it can't be mitame anything else. I believe if it touches kodshim, though, it would become a revi. We'll get to kodshim in a second, to kodesh. Now, therefore, so a sheni l'tumah, if it touches truma, it's posel truma because that truma cannot be mitame any other truma. And then when it comes to kodesh, so again, you have the pizza, which is a sheni l'tumah. If it touches, shlamim meat, so that shlamim becomes tame to be a shlishi. And then if it touches other shlamim meat, so then it would be posel that shlamim meat, i.e., it stops at the revi l'tumah. Now, there are all sorts of dinim d'Rabbanan when it comes to tumah, right? Those are the dinim d'Oraisa of tumah. Then you get into the dinim d'Rabbanan, it's a whole world. Now, stam yadayim shniyosei, that your hands are considered sheni l'tumah. So noten liyadayim, so you just need to wash your hands. So, take a washing cup, a washing cup that you use as a washing cup. You know what I mean? So you fill it, the two handles. So you fill it up, you wash your hands. That, it works lechulin. If you want to eat chulin, okay. With the meiser, if you want to eat meiser sheni, so then, you're in Yerushalayim, you brought your meiser sheni, so you could just wash your hands with the washing cup. With the truma. And also if you want to eat truma, and your hands, are stam yodayim, so you can just wash your hands with a washing cup. And if you're a kohen, you can eat truma. Now, v'la kodesh, now when it comes to kodesh, if you want to eat a shlomim, let's say, so matbilin, so then you dip your hands in 40 sa'ah of water, right? You have to dip your hands in a mikvah. V'lachatos, if you want to interact with water that the ashes of a parah aduma have been mixed into, right? Mechatos. So im nitmu yodov nitma gufo. Now, when it comes to a korban chatos, not korban chatos, mechatos, when it comes to sprinkling parah aduma water, so then even if your hands become tameh, you have to go in the mikvah. So meaning, your whole body has to go to the mikvah. Meaning, for mechatos, it's not enough to simply put your hands in 40 sa'ah, like we said you could do for a shlamim, for kodesh. But for mechatos, you actually have to immerse in 40 sa'ah. You have to immerse in a mikvah. Tovel l'chulin. If a fellow went to the mikvah and he intended, I'm going into the mikvah so that I can eat chulin, right, non-consecrated foods. So huchzak l'chulin. Okay, so gevaldik. So the mikvah works for chulin, also l'maiser, but that's it. He can consume chulin, he cannot consume maiser sheni, because he didn't go to the mikvah with that intention, right? And that's like one step up, right? Meaning the sort of chain is chulin, maiser sheni, truma, kodesh, mechatos, right? So again, so tavel l'chulin. So if you went to the mikvah for chulin, huchzak l'chulin also l'maiser. So fine, that works for chulin. It will not work for maiser sheni. Tavel l'maiser. If a fellow went to the mikvah with the intention of Meiser Sheni, Hulzak Lemeiser, so it works for Meiser Sheni, also the Truma, but he would not be allowed to eat Truma if he's a Kohen. Tava l'truma, a fellow went to the mikveh with the intention of truma. Huchzak l'truma, so kivaldig, you enjoy the truma, also the kodesh, but he would not be allowed to eat kodshim. So if he's a yisrael, so I guess that would be a shlomim meat. But if he's a kohen, it could be a korban chatas meat, an osham meat. Tava l'kodesh, if he goes to the mikveh with the intention of kodshim, of korbanis meat, so huchzak l'kodesh, so he's allowed to eat korbanis meat, also l'chatos, but he wouldn't be allowed to interact with mechatos, right, the water with the para aduma in it. Tava l'chomer, muter l'kal, and the idea is that if you go to the mikveh with the intention of something more stringent, so it then, sort of cascades down and will work as well for the less stringent one. So for example, a fellow went to the mikveh with the intention of trumah, so then memele he'd also be allowed to eat meiser sheni, he'd be allowed to eat chulin. Tovav lo chzakil lo tovel. A fellow went to the mikvah and he didn't have any particular intention, so then it doesn't make any difference. It's as if he didn't go to the mikvah at all. Now, big day am haaretz midrash lefrushin. The garments of an am haaretz are considered like midrash lefrushin. What in the world does that mean, friends? What's tumas midrash? I remember Rabbi Yisrael when we were learning Masechta Shabbos. Remember, he commented that he commented on the sugya of hamoed v'naisim lachteinu. Rabbi Yisrael, you remember that? Hakoponim. So what's tumas midrash? Tumas midrash is, let's say you have a zav, and azoy. Hakoponim. So let's say you have epis azav, and he's an avatuma. And there's an interesting halacha when it comes to a zav. I think maybe by a mitzora as well. Let's stick with the zav. But anything that he sits on becomes an avatuma like him. So like if you have a zav who's an avatuma and he touches epis, a fellow, so the fellow becomes a rishon l'tuma. But if he sits on a chair, that chair becomes an avatuma just like him. So that's what's midrash. So tumas midrash is like an avatuma. So what we're saying is, relatively speaking, big day am haaretz, that the garments of an am haaretz, an unlearned person, let's call it, midrash lefrushin, are as good as tumas midrash when it comes to people who are makpid, who are careful to eat chulin in a pure state. That if they interact with the garments of an am haaretz, they basically have to wash their hands before eating chulin, or whatever the halachas were that we interacted with earlier in the Mishnah. Big day prushin, the garments of people who are generally careful to eat chulin in a pure state, midrash lo'ochle truma, would nonetheless be considered like tumas midrash for people who eat truma, right? Like kohanim, for example. So if they interact with the garment of this fellow who generally eats, in holy, sort of remains pure, but nonetheless, when it comes to a fellow who needs to eat truma, which you have to be tahara to do, so if you interact with the clothing of a prushin, so you would have to purify himself. Big day ochle truma midrash lekodesh, and again, the clothing of people who eat truma, vis-a-vis, I guess, the people who are eating korbanis, so then, if they interact with that clothing of people who are eating truma, so then they would need to, go to the mikvah. So big day kodesh midrash, or wash their hands in the mikvah. Big day kodesh midrash lechatas, and the garments of somebody who eats korbanis would sort of still be, if somebody who needs to interact with para aduma water touch the garments of a person who eats korbanis, he would still have to go to the mikvah. Now, Yosef ben Yoezer, friends, that's incredible. Remember we saw Yosef ben Yoezer the other day? He was the first of the Zugis. So now, apparently he was a Kohen. That's amazing. So Yosef ben Yoezer, he was very pious of the priests, and nonetheless, so he would eat truma, but his sort of turban, his headdress. What's a headdress? I don't know, I guess a turban? Alright, what do I mean to tell you? Something you put it on his head, I guess? Was considered midras for people who eat korbanos. Right? He was eating truma. It's considered midras for somebody who eats korbanos. Yochanan ben Gudgada, he ochled al tyrus hakodesh. Now Yochanan ben Gudgada would always make sure that he was pure enough to always be able to eat kodshim. Koyamav v'haisa mitpachno midras lechatas. And nonetheless, his, I guess, turban or whatever would be considered midras with regard to people who are interacting with mechatas, the para aduma water, right? Because you have to go to the mikvah in order to interact with that. That's like the highest level. Super interesting stuff, friends. Let's move on. Chulin u'maiser ba'u netilas yadoim. In fact, the Gemara, is it true that chulin and maiser you have to wash your hands, right? Now, what did the Mishnah say? Who could tell me? What was the first line of the Mishnah? Notlin liyadayim l'chulin u'maiser l'truma. That you have to wash your hands for chulin, maiser sheni, and truma. So the Gemara points out that what's interesting about that opening statement is that true? Do you really have to wash your hands in order to eat chulin and maiser sheni? Friends, what's chulin? Chulin is just any regular food. Pizza is chulin, you know. Maiser sheni, of course, is that you have a field, and before you can enjoy the fruits of your labor, you take 2%, give it to the kohen, take another 10% around, and give it to the Levi, take another 10% around, and you, meaning a little bit less because it's of the amount that's left over, whatever it is, and you bring that to Jerusalem and you eat it in Jerusalem. So now, do you really have to wash your hands for chulin and for maiser sheni? But we have a question. When it comes to truma, when it comes to bikurim, what are bikurim? The first fruits. Right? You go into your field, you see epis of a fig, you tie epis around the fig, and you bring the fig to Jerusalem. Fine. Miso. If you eat, right? If let's say a non-Kohen, let's say, eats them, it's chayiv miso, or maybe even if a Kohen eats them, but he's tameh, so I think maybe also in that case it's chayiv, although in that case that actually might be karis. I think here we're talking about misa b'dei shamayim. What do you want me to tell you? So I guess maybe, if a non-Kohen eats them, it's chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. Friends, what do we learn out in like Masechta Moed Kohen? That's misa b'dei shamayim is like, 60 years old or something? V'chomesh, and if you eat it by accident, so then you pay back the principal plus a fifth. Also the zarim, non-koyanim are forbidden from eating truma and bikurim. Nichsei kohen, they belong to the priest. If he wants, he can marry a woman with that truma and bikurim. It's his. He can do what he wants with it. I mentioned marrying a woman because that's what Rashi points out. V'olin be'echad v'meya, and if it falls into a mixture, so it's only batal if there are 100 times chulin, 100 times more chulin than truma or bikurim. V'tunas netilas yodayim, and you have to wash your hands before eating truma or before eating bikurim. V'hayriv shemesh, and also if you have a fellow who has tumah de oraisa, becomes something like touched up as a sheretz, and now he's tameh and he's got to go to the mikvah, and so then he's tameh till the evening. In order to eat truma or bikurim, you'd have to wait till the evening. Harelu betruma bikurim. It says the Mishnah, or it says the Brisa, that this is by truma. All these halachas are specifically by truma and bikurim. And remember, the halachas included netilas yadayim. That's by truma and bikurim. Masha ein kain b'maiser. And that would not apply to maiser sheni, i.e., those rules, including washing your hands, would not apply to maiser sheni. V'chol shekain, points out the Gemara, b'chulin, and certainly if it doesn't apply to maiser sheni, then certainly it does not apply to chulin, i.e., by chulin, right? Chulin and maiser sheni are conspicuously left out of that brisa, and implying that you do not need to wash your hands for maiser sheni and for chulin. So, kasra maiser a-maiser, kasha chulin a-chulin. So we have a question both by maiser and by chulin, because our Mishnah says you would have to wash your hands, and the Brisa says that you would not. So now says the Gemara, Bishlama maiser a-maiser lo kasha. The Gemara says, look, easy to explain how the maiser sheni thing is not a problem. Harav meir v'arabbanon. It's a clean machlokas between Reb Meir and the Rabbanon. The Tanan is we learn in the Mishnah called Aton Bias Mayim Midivrei Sofrim. Anything that requires going into the water, that requires water, Midir Rabbanon Mitame es hakodesh. So basically, if it's tumah dirabanan, if we're talking about tumah dirabanan, so that's a status of a sheni, right? For example, midirabanan, we say your hands are right. Stamidam shniosein. So we say your hands are a sheni l'tumah, right? So anything that is tamim midirabanan, it's a sheni l'tumah. Mitame es hakodesh. So as I explained earlier, it makes kodesh like korbanis tame, i.e., it'll make the korbanis into a, right? So if you have a meat of a shlamim, so it'll make it into a shlishi, and then if that touches other meat, then that becomes a revi'i. Ufosel es truma, and a sheni, if it touches truma, it makes a truma posel, i.e., it can no longer be mitame other things. Although I think it could be mitame kodshim. Umuter lechulin ulemaiser, and it is permitted when it comes to chulin and when it comes to meiser divrei Reb Meir. And also, when it comes to chulin and when it comes to meiser, so it would be permitted, i.e., you would not need to wash your hands, right? Meaning these tumah d'rabbanans, with regard to chulin, with regard to meiser, it's fine. It's no problem. You don't have to wash your hands or anything like that. Divrei Meir, that's Reb Meir's opinion. Chacham osim b'meiser. The Chacham say, wait, when it comes to meiser sheni, the sheni, the tumas would be a problem. You would have to wash your hands. So therefore, going back to our Mishnah, which says that you need to wash your hands for meiser sheni, and the Brisa, which says that you do not need to wash your hands for meiser sheni, well, easy. The Mishnah that says that you do need to wash your hands is the Chacham. The Brisa that says that you do not need to wash your hands, that is Reb Meir. Now, the problem is, chulin kasha. But what about chulin? Because, right, we said in the Brisa that the rabbis say it's also specifically when it comes to meiser. But what about chulin? Where do we see, how do we explain the fact that the Mishnah says that you need to wash your hands for chulin, and the Brisa says that you do not need to wash your hands for chulin? So lo kasha, no problem. Kan ba'achila, kan b'negia. It depends. Are we talking about eating it or are we talking about touching it? The Mishnah says that you have to wash your hands for chulin. That's to eat chulin. The Brisa says you don't have to wash your hands for chulin. That's to touch chulin. Alright. What do you want me to tell you? Alright, so to touch chulin, you wouldn't have to wash your hands first. But maskif lo Rav Shimi bar Ashi. Rav Shimi bar Ashi has a kasha. Ad kan lo pligi. We have a Brisa that says that ad kan lo pligi rabbanon ole Reb Meir, that the rabbis only have an argument with Reb Meir el ba'achila de meiser, with regards to eating meiser, right? Meaning we had said that Reb Meir says that when it comes to tumah d'rabbanon by chulin and meiser, Reb Meir says don't worry about it. You don't have to wash your hands or anything. And he says that the rabbis argue with regards to meiser, that you would have to wash your hands. Now, it says this Brisa that the rabbis only say that you have to wash your hands for meiser with regards to eating meiser, aval b'negia de meiser, but just to touch meiser, uva'achila de chulin, right, meiser sheni, uva'achila de chulin, and when we talk about even eating chulin, lo plike, they don't argue with Reb Meir, i.e., that everyone agrees that when it comes to chulin, both eating and touching do not require washing your hands. If that's the case, so then who's the author of our Mishnah that says that you have to wash your hands for chulin? So, and for the Gemara, ela idi ve'idi ba'achila. So rather, one second. Fine. So ela idi ve'idi ba'achila. So actually, one second. Okay, so here we go. And it's a brilliant answer, friends. This is huge. So rather, both the Mishnah and the Brisa are talking about eating. The Mishnah says that you have to wash your hands for chulin, and the Brisa says you don't have to wash your hands for chulin. They're both talking about eating chulin. V'lo kasha kan ba'achila de naima, kan ba'achila de peri. It depends what you're eating. If you're eating bread, of course, as we all know, friends, when do you wash your hands? When do you wash our hands, I hope, all sorts of times. But Friends, when's the classic time that everybody gets up from the table and goes to the sink and fills up a washing cup with 2 handles and pours it on their hands? For bread, right? Of course. But you don't do that before you eat an apple, right? You don't say, wait a second, and you go pick up a washing cup and you wash your hands 2 times each, or 3 times, whatever, however you do it, for an apple. No, you don't do that. Rav Nachman says, somebody who washes his hands like that for fruits, it's shtickle hori. So, therefore, our Mishnah, which says that you wash your hands for chulin, that's talking about bread. The Brisa, which says that you do not wash your hands for chulin, that's talking about fruits. Amazing. And it sounds like this is sort of like the basis for why do we wash our hands before eating bread? Well, because we wash our hands even before eating chulin, but specifically bread of chulin. But other things, we would not, right? It would be considered hard if we wash our hands first. Super interesting stuff, friends. Anyways, that was Daf Yud Ches. The first part of the Daf, we learned another explanation of how we know that you can have tashlumin, that you can make up for the korbanos of Shavuos after Shavuos for the, over the course of the week. We also discussed Chol hamoed being asur b'asiyas malacha. We learned all sorts of sources for how we know that you're not allowed to do malacha on Chol hamoed. Finally, with ending off with an opinion that it says that that you don't do malacha for 7 days of Pesach, but it also says only the last day you don't do malacha. So what does it mean? So we said that God gave sort of the power, sort of the trust, and He empowered the Chacham to be able to determine what's considered malacha that you're allowed to do on Chol hamoed and what's considered malacha that you're not allowed to do on Chol hamoed. Super interesting stuff. And then we got to tumah and tahara. Most notably, that the Mishnah says that you wash your hands for Meiser Sheni and for Chulin. We had a differing brisa. We initially said that, right? So we said that when it comes to Meiser, so the rabbis say that you would have to wash your hands for Meiser, but we qualified for Meiser Sheni. We qualified that specifically to eat Meiser Sheni. Rav Meir says you would not need to wash your hands to eat Meiser Sheni. Now, the rabbis say when it comes to chulin, so if you're going to be eating like breads, then you would wash your hands. If you're going to be eating fruits, then you would not wash your hands for chulin. And this is talking about tumah d'Rabbanan, of course. That's tam yadayim or shnios. If you're tamim mid'oraisa, then you're going to have to go to the mikveh and then wait till the evening and stuff like that. Although not necessarily to eat chulin, but the point is that washing your hands for chulin, that works when we're talking about tumah d'Rabbanan. Friends, that was Daf Yud Ches of Masechta Hagiga. I hope you enjoyed it. Peace out.